The waiter pointed toward the corner of the grand reception hall where a cheap folding table sat hidden behind a dying potted palm. "Miss, that's your assigned seat," he said quietly, his eyes unable to meet hers. 22-year-old Sarah Thompson stood frozen, clutching her place card with trembling fingers. Around her, 200 elegantly dressed guests laughed and clinked champagne glasses at beautifully decorated tables that seated 8 people each. Every table except one. Her table. Set for one person. Alone. This was her own sister's wedding, yet she had been banished to eat by herself like she carried some terrible disease. Sarah adjusted her modest beige dress with her right hand, her only hand, and began the long walk across the polished floor. She could feel every eye in the room pretending not to watch the young woman with one arm being treated like something shameful that needed hiding. But what Sarah didn't know was that in exactly 3 minutes, everything would change. A stranger would stand up, walk across that glittering room, and speak 6 words that would shatter 10 years of carefully constructed cruelty. Earlier that day, Sarah had tried to convince herself that things would be different at her sister Jennifer's wedding. The Thompson family had taken her in 10 years ago after a terrible car accident killed her parents and crushed her left arm so badly that doctors had to remove it. She was only 12 years old then, scared and alone. Patricia and William Thompson had appeared at the hospital with photographers and held her hand for the cameras. The newspapers called them heroes for adopting a disabled orphan. But the cameras never showed what happened after the photos were taken. They never showed how Patricia stopped touching Sarah once the publicity ended. They never showed how Sarah ate her dinners alone in the kitchen while the Thompson family dined together in the elegant dining room. They never showed the 8 o'clock curfew Sarah had while Jennifer could stay out all night. They never showed William introducing Sarah as a charity case at the country club. For 10 years, Sarah lived in the servants' wing of their mansion, hoping that if she stayed quiet enough and helpful enough, the Thompsons would eventually love her like real family. She studied hard at community college while Jennifer went to an expensive university. She never complained when Jennifer got a new car for her 16th birthday while Sarah got nothing. She smiled politely when people praised the Thompsons for their generosity. She became an expert at making herself invisible. Now, walking toward that lonely table at Jennifer's wedding, Sarah realized that nothing had changed. She was still the girl they kept hidden away. The jazz quartet played softly as Sarah reached her folding table. She sat down in the single chair, her back perfectly straight, and stared at the elaborate ice sculpture of 2 swans that she would never be close enough to see properly. Her shoulders shook once, just once, as she fought back tears. She had dressed so carefully that morning, hoping to belong. But the Thompsons had made sure everyone knew exactly where she belonged. In the corner. Alone. Out of sight. Across the reception hall, a man watched this happen with growing anger. Marcus Davis sat at a table with his co-workers, his champagne glass untouched. His dark skin gleamed under the crystal chandeliers as he observed Sarah being isolated like she didn't matter. Marcus Davis had lost his wife Monica 3 years ago to a sudden brain aneurysm. One minute she was laughing at breakfast, the next minute she was gone forever. Since then he had raised their 7-year-old daughter Emma alone, working as an accountant to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. That very morning, Emma had made him promise to make at least one new friend at the wedding. "You're always alone, Daddy," she had said seriously. "Mommy wouldn't want that." Monica would have been halfway across this reception hall already, Marcus thought as he watched Sarah sit alone. His wife had possessed a fierce sense of justice and could never stand seeing someone isolated or made to feel less than human. She would have marched right over to that corner table without a second thought. The woman at the next table didn't bother lowering her voice as she gossiped. "Can you believe Jennifer actually invited her? After everything the Thompsons did for that girl, taking her in after that horrible accident." Her companion laughed coldly. "Please, Linda. We all know why William really adopted her. His company was losing money after laying off 300 employees. Taking in a disabled orphan was the best publicity stunt he ever pulled. Diversity and disability all in one photo opportunity." Marcus's hand tightened around his champagne glass. He had heard rumors about William Thompson's business practices, but this confirmed everything. The adoption had never been about love. It had been about repairing a damaged reputation. The jazz quartet shifted to a slower melody. Jennifer glided past in her expensive wedding dress, her laugh sharp as breaking glass. When her eyes swept over Sarah's corner, Marcus saw it clearly. A flash of cruel satisfaction on the bride's face. She was enjoying her sister's humiliation. That was the moment Marcus stood up. "Marcus, where are you going?" His co-worker Trina grabbed his sleeve. "They're about to serve dinner." He gently pulled free. There's something I need to do first. Each step across that reception hall felt like walking through thick honey. Every eye gradually turned to watch his movement. A man in a modest suit walking away from his assigned seat, walking toward the girl everyone had silently agreed to ignore. Sarah didn't look up when his shadow fell across her table. She had learned long ago not to expect kindness from well-dressed strangers at fancy parties. 10 years of disappointment had taught her that lesson thoroughly. "Excuse me," Marcus said, his voice deliberately gentle. That gentleness was what finally made Sarah raise her eyes. She had expected mockery or pity, but his tone carried neither. "I'm Marcus Davis. I work with Andrew the groom. I couldn't help but notice you're sitting alone." Sarah's response came out practiced and automatic. "It's fine. This is where they wanted me to sit." The words tasted like ash in her mouth, but she had said them so many times they came easily now. "I know," Marcus interrupted softly, pulling out the empty chair across from her without asking permission first. "But here's the thing. My daughter Emma, she's 7 years old. She made me promise this morning to make at least one new friend at this wedding. She worries about me being lonely since her mother died." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper meant only for Sarah's ears. "Would you do me a huge favor and act like you're with me? Just for the reception? You'd really be helping me keep my promise to my daughter." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She searched Marcus's face desperately for the hidden joke, for the cruelty that must be lurking behind those kind brown eyes. 10 years with the Thompsons had taught her that kindness from strangers always came with a price attached. But all she found in his expression was genuine sadness that matched her own and something else. Real anger on her behalf, not at her. "Your daughter," Sarah managed to say, her voice cracking with emotion. "She sounds very wise." Marcus smiled, and it transformed his entire face. "Much wiser than her old man most days. So what do you say? My table has an empty seat and I could really use the company. These accounting folks are nice enough, but they've been discussing tax codes for 20 minutes straight." A small laugh escaped Sarah's lips. It was the first genuine sound of joy she had made all day, maybe all year. "I don't know anything about tax codes," she admitted. "Perfect," Marcus replied warmly. "Neither does anyone else at that table. They just pretend they do." He stood and offered his arm like a gentleman from an old movie. "Shall we?" Sarah stared at his extended elbow. In 10 years of living with the Thompsons, nobody had ever offered their arm to her. They always walked ahead, embarrassed by her missing limb, embarrassed by the constant reminder of the tragedy that had brought her into their perfect lives. "People will stare at us," she warned quietly. "Let them stare," Marcus said firmly. Sarah stood slowly, her hand trembling as she placed it carefully in the crook of his elbow. Together they began walking back across the reception hall. The whispering started immediately, spreading through the crowd like ripples from a stone thrown into still water. 200 guests watched with open mouths as a man voluntarily chose to be seen with the girl they had all agreed to ignore. When they reached Marcus's table, he pulled out the empty chair beside his own with a grand gesture. "Everyone, this is Sarah." His co-workers stared in stunned silence. Trina's mouth fell open. James from payroll choked on his wine. But Marcus just smiled pleasantly, helping Sarah into her seat as if this was the most natural thing in the entire world. "Marcus," Trina hissed urgently, "do you know who that is? That's the Thompsons' adopted daughter. The one they stuck in a corner to eat alone at her own sister's wedding." Marcus's voice remained pleasant, but there was steel underneath his calm tone. "Yes, I noticed that. That's exactly why she's sitting with us now." The entire table fell into uncomfortable silence. Sarah felt her cheeks burning with shame. She started to stand up, ready to retreat back to her lonely corner. "I should go back to my table," she whispered. But Marcus's hand covered hers gently, warm and steadying on the white tablecloth. "Please stay with us, Sarah. You belong here." That was when the storm arrived in expensive silver heels and righteous fury. Patricia Thompson descended upon their table like an avenging angel wrapped in designer silk. Her husband William trailed behind, his face flushed red with embarrassment and too much alcohol. "Sarah," Patricia's voice could have frozen champagne solid. "What do you think you're doing?" Every conversation within 30 feet stopped dead. Even the jazz quartet seemed to play quieter, as if the musicians sensed the approaching drama. Sarah immediately shrank into herself, that practiced submission returning instantly after years of conditioning. "Mrs. Thompson, she began weakly. "Mrs. Thompson, I presume," Marcus interrupted calmly, standing slowly and positioning himself slightly between Patricia and Sarah. "I'm Marcus Davis. I invited Sarah to join our table. Is there a problem with that? Patricia's perfectly smooth face tried to express outrage, but years of cosmetic procedures allowed only a slight eyebrow twitch. This is a family matter, Mr. Davis? You don't understand the situation at all. Then please enlighten me, Marcus said evenly. William stepped forward, his words slurred from drinking. We took this girl in out of pure goodness. When she had nowhere else to go, when nobody else wanted her. We fed her, clothed her, sent her to school. Community college, he added with emphasis, as if that explained everything. While Jennifer went to an expensive university, Sarah's voice was barely a whisper, but somehow it carried across the silent room. The words hung in the air like smoke. Patricia's carefully constructed composure cracked. How dare you speak that way? After everything we've done for you? Marcus's calm voice cut through her building rage. How dare she what? Tell the truth? That you took in a traumatized 12-year-old girl not out of love, but because your husband's company needed good publicity after laying off 300 employees. Gasps rippled through the growing crowd of onlookers. Someone had stopped the jazz quartet completely now. Every single eye in the reception hall turned toward their corner. That's a lie. William's face turned from red to purple with fury. Is it really? An elderly voice suddenly cut through the tension. Mrs. Henderson, Andrew's grandmother, approached with her walker, her eyes blazing with righteous anger. Because I remember the newspaper headlines very clearly. William Thompson opens heart and home to orphan girl, right next to articles about families losing their homes because of your company's layoffs. Sarah found her voice then, soft but growing stronger. 10 years of suppressed truth began spilling out like water through a cracked dam. I wasn't allowed to eat dinner with the family. I had an 8 o'clock curfew while Jennifer could stay out all night. You introduced me as your charity case at the country club. Her voice grew steadier with each word. I heard you tell your friends that adopting me was the best business decision William ever made. You ungrateful little... Patricia stepped forward aggressively, but Marcus moved too, shielding Sarah completely with his body. Finish that sentence, he said quietly, dangerously. Please give me one good reason. The bride herself rustled over then, her expensive wedding dress train carried by 2 bridesmaids. Her face was a cold mask of beauty. Mother, please. People are staring at us. Let them stare, Marcus said firmly. Let them see exactly how you treat family. Jennifer turned to Sarah, her eyes like chips of ice. You're completely ruining my wedding day with this drama. No, Mrs. Henderson interjected, her walker thumping against the floor for emphasis. Your family's cruelty is ruining your wedding. This young woman deserved love, not a 10-year business arrangement for good publicity. Sarah stood up shakily, her whole body trembling uncontrollably. I need some air right now. Marcus said immediately, I'll come with you. They walked out together, leaving behind 200 stunned guests and a family whose carefully constructed public image had just shattered like the champagne glass William threw violently against the wall. The garden terrace was cool and peaceful. The sounds of scandal inside were muffled by distance and thick glass doors. Sarah leaned heavily against the stone railing, her body shaking with suppressed sobs that she had held back for too many years. 10 years, she whispered into the night air. 10 years of believing that if I was just quiet enough, helpful enough, invisible enough, they would actually love me like real family. Marcus stood beside her, not touching, just present and steady. Tell me about the accident that took your parents, he said gently. Sarah was quiet for so long that Marcus thought she wouldn't answer. Finally she spoke. A power line came down during a storm and hit our car. My parents died instantly. I was trapped inside for 3 hours with my arm crushed under the collapsed roof. The doctors had to remove it to save my life. I was 12 years old and completely alone. Her voice grew quieter. The Thompsons showed up at the hospital with newspaper photographers. Patricia held my hand for all the pictures, smiling for the cameras. Then she didn't touch me again for 6 months. I lived in their house but never felt like I lived in their home. Marcus found himself sharing too. My wife Monica died 3 years ago from a brain aneurysm. 1 minute she was laughing at breakfast, the next minute she was gone forever. I know it's not exactly the same as your loss, but I understand something about existing in spaces where you don't quite belong. Trying to be invisible enough that nobody asks you to leave. Sarah turned to really look at him then. Why did you really come to my table tonight? Marcus met her eyes steadily. Because I saw someone who needed to know they weren't completely alone in this world. And because something about watching you sit there reminded me that staying silent when we see cruelty makes us part of that cruelty. My wife Monica would have been proud of what you did tonight. I hope she would be, Marcus said softly. She had this amazing way of seeing people who were trying to disappear and making them feel seen in the best possible way. She would have liked you very much. They returned to the reception to find complete chaos. Half the guests had already left in disgust. The other half were clustered in tight groups, whispering furiously about what they had witnessed. The Thompsons sat at the head table like frozen ice sculptures, rigid and cold with shame. But Mrs. Henderson had somehow taken control of the microphone at the front of the room. 53 years of marriage taught me something important, the elderly woman was saying to the remaining guests. Family isn't about blood or adoption papers or tax write-offs for charity. It's about choosing to love someone every single day, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. She looked directly at the Thompsons with fierce eyes. Some of you in this room could learn a great deal from that simple truth. The rest of the reception passed in a strange blur. Marcus and Sarah danced to one slow song, her single arm wrapped carefully around his neck, his hands steady and anchoring at her waist. Other guests approached them throughout the evening. Some offered quiet support. Others shared their own stories of the Thompson family's casual cruelties over the years that nobody had dared speak about before tonight. They made their housekeeper's daughter wait outside during Jennifer's birthday parties, one woman whispered with shame in her voice. William fired my husband 2 weeks before Christmas, then bought himself an expensive yacht, another guest added bitterly. At midnight, as the terrible reception finally ended, Jennifer approached one last time. Her makeup had run in black streams down her perfect cheeks, ruining her wedding photos. Are you happy now? Jennifer hissed at Sarah, her voice shaking with rage. You've destroyed everything. My perfect wedding is ruined because of you. Sarah replied quietly, her voice steady for the first time in years. No, Jennifer. I didn't destroy anything. You destroyed it the day you let them put me at that table alone. Jennifer's hand raised as if to slap her, but Marcus caught her wrist firmly. Touch her, he said with deadly calm, and I'll personally ensure every newspaper in the state runs this story with photographs. Jennifer yanked her arm free and stormed away, her train dragging behind her like the tattered remnants of her reputation. The next morning, Sarah's phone rang at 6 o'clock. Patricia's voice was arctic cold. You have 30 days to pack your belongings and leave this house. Get out. The line went dead. Sarah sat on her narrow bed in the servants' wing of the Thompson mansion, where they had always kept her, and realized she didn't feel sad. She had run out of tears somewhere around year 5. Her phone rang again. Sarah, I heard what happened, Marcus said without introduction. Trina's cousin was working at the reception last night. News travels fast in a small town like this. Sarah took a deep breath. I'll be fine. I've been saving money from my library job. I'll find an apartment somewhere. Marcus's next words felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning person. Come stay with us. We have a spare room. Emma would love the company and honestly so would I. Marcus, you barely know me, Sarah protested weakly. I know enough, he replied firmly. I know you deserve so much better than what you've gotten. Let us be your soft landing place. 2 weeks later, Marcus and 7-year-old Emma pulled up to the Thompson mansion in his old sedan. Sarah waited on the front steps with 2 suitcases and a backpack. Her entire life packed into 3 bags. Patricia watched from an upstairs window, her face a mask of cold fury. Jennifer stood in the doorway in silk pajamas, even though it was noon. You've ruined everything, she said flatly. Andrew's family is questioning if I'm like my parents. People are calling us monsters on social media. Marcus lifted Sarah's suitcases into his trunk. Your actions made you monsters. Sarah just stopped letting you hide it from everyone. Emma, who had been quietly watching, suddenly spoke up. Her hair was pulled into neat ponytails as she asked seriously, Why were you so mean to Miss Sarah? Jennifer stared at the child. You wouldn't understand. You're just a kid. Emma crossed her small arms. I'm 7, not dumb. Daddy says family means choosing to love someone every day even when it's hard. You just chose to be mean instead. The drive to Marcus's house was quiet until Emma reached forward from her booster seat to pat Sarah's shoulder with a sticky hand. My mommy died too when I was 4. But Daddy says the people who love us never really leave. They just love us from farther away now. Marcus met Sarah's eyes in the rearview mirror. She was crying silently, but for the first time in 10 years, they weren't tears of pain. The house was modest, a 2-story home in a quiet neighborhood with a porch that needed painting. But when Sarah walked through the door, she saw what the Thompson mansion with all its marble and crystal had never possessed. Warmth. Children's artwork covered the refrigerator. Family photos lined the walls showing real smiles and genuine love. Over the following months, something beautiful grew. Sarah helped Emma with homework. She cooked dinners using recipes she found in the kitchen. She told bedtime stories and slowly began to smile without first checking if she was allowed. One evening, 6 months after moving in, Sarah told Marcus she had been accepted to the state university with a scholarship. "I want to be a social worker. Help kids who've been through trauma like I did." Emma made a banner from construction paper that said, "Congratulations, Sarah," and hung it across the living room. They celebrated with pizza. That night on the porch, Sarah finally thanked Marcus properly. "Not just for the wedding but for showing me what real family feels like." Marcus took her hand gently. "You've given us just as much. Emma adores you and I haven't felt this happy in 3 years." "I love you," Sarah whispered. "I love you too," Marcus replied. They were married 1 year later in their backyard. Emma was the flower girl, throwing petals everywhere and only dropping the rings twice. The Thompsons weren't invited. And standing there watching Sarah walk down the aisle in a simple white dress, Marcus thought about how one choice, 6 simple words, had built a family and proved that love was about choosing each other, especially when the world said you weren't worth choosing. 10 years passed like pages turning in a beautiful book. Sarah graduated from university and became a social worker, helping dozens of children find real homes with families who chose to love them. Marcus continued his accounting work, coming home each evening to a house filled with warmth and laughter. Emma grew from a curious 7-year-old into a confident young woman. On a warm spring evening, Emma stood at the podium of her high school auditorium as valedictorian. She looked out across the crowd until she found her parents sitting in the 3rd row. Sarah and Marcus held hands tightly, their faces glowing with pride. Beside them sat their 2 other children. Michael, age 8, whom they had adopted from the foster system 3 years ago. And baby Grace, age 2, their biological daughter who had Marcus's smile and Sarah's determined spirit. Emma cleared her throat and began her speech. "When I was 7 years old, my dad went to a wedding and came home with the woman who would become my mother. He taught me something that day that I'll never forget. Real love isn't about taking someone in for show or for good publicity. It's about saying act like you're with me and truly meaning you are with me forever. It's about choosing to stand beside someone when the whole world tries to make them stand alone." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "My mom lost her arm in an accident that took her birth parents. She survived 10 years with people who saw her as a publicity tool, not as a person. But she never let that break her kindness or her spirit. She became a social worker and has helped hundreds of kids find real homes. She taught me that families aren't built from obligation or blood or legal papers. They're built from choice. The choice to love someone every single day." Sarah wiped tears from her eyes as Marcus squeezed her hand. Emma smiled at them from the stage. "My parents taught me that sometimes all it takes is one person brave enough to walk across a room and say you belong here. Because love isn't about grand gestures or perfect bloodlines. Love is about showing up. Love is about meaning it when you say someone is worth choosing." After the ceremony, the family gathered on their front porch as the sun set over their neighborhood. Michael chased fireflies in the yard while Grace slept peacefully in Sarah's arm. Emma sat between her parents, still wearing her graduation cap. "Thank you," she said quietly to both of them, "for showing me what real family looks like." Marcus thought about that September wedding 13 years ago when he had stood up from his assigned seat and walked across a room full of people who thought staying silent was safer than speaking up. He thought about the moment he had seen Sarah at that lonely table and decided that his comfort mattered less than her pain. One choice. 6 simple words. Act like you're with me, please. Those 6 words had built a family, saved 2 people from loneliness, given 3 children a loving home, and proved that belonging isn't something you're born into. It's something you choose to create, one act of courage at a time. Sarah leaned her head against Marcus's shoulder as stars began appearing in the darkening sky. "I'm home," she whispered. Finally home. And she was. Thanks for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. It really helps us keep bringing you more stories. Turn on the bell so you don't miss what's coming next.